Hello, I'm David McAllister-Wilson, president of Wesley Theological Seminary. I recently had a very special conversation in Oxnam Chapel here on the campus about artificial intelligence. Why? Hasn't everything been said by now, you might ask? Well, my conviction is this is the biggest challenge that we ought to address as communities of faith. My hope is that Wesley takes a leading role. And the Lilly Endowment has invited us to submit a new grant initiative called Growing in Faith in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. The aim of this initiative is to help youth and young adults draw on the wisdom of Christian traditions to engage in spiritual practices that deepen their faith and help them discern the best uses of digital technology, especially artificial intelligence. We are currently in a research and planning phase. This conversation comes because of the way our two panelists have influenced my thinking. They bring expertise from two very different perspectives. General James Cartwright is a retired four-star Marine general. His accomplishments, roles, and awards are too numerous to list here. I'll just mention two of them. He served as commander of the U.S. Strategic Command and vice chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Suffice to say, he has been in the middle of strategic defense for decades. To this topic, he brings years of working with the Defense Advanced Research Project, better known as DARPA. My AI tool found him referred to as the geek's best pal. I know that as a board member at Wesley, he has been urging me for 3 years to focus on what these large language models mean for Wesley and the church. I always listen to General Cartwright's advice. I don't always know how to follow it. Then I read Dr. Allison Pugh's book, The Last Human Job, Seeing Each Other in an Age of Automation. I have become the Johnny Appleseed of this book in my circles for reasons I hope will become clear. Allison is a professor of sociology at Johns Hopkins University and a 2026 Guggenheim Fellow. She is also the author of The Tumbleweed Society, Working and Caring in an Age of Insecurity. Her first book, Longing and Belonging, Parents, Children, and Consumer Culture, won multiple Best Book Awards. I think, though, a way to know Allison is the way she ends her emails. She always ends with, warmly, Allison. I hope you enjoy this conversation.
One great opportunity to have this discussion, so thank you for sponsoring this. Two, like you, David, after reading the book, I'm a big fan. So, we listen carefully. The idea of, kind of what drives fear in this activity, and then where's the opportunity. I thought you were going to go with world hunger, but we'll take AI instead. I think looking at what people worry about and where we are right now, the issue is not whether we're going to have AI. The question is, what kind of AI are we going to have? How are we going to manage it? How are we going to leverage it? It should be thought of, at least in this context, more as the servant, not the savior. Okay, that's the role that we're looking for. That's the role we're looking to optimize against. The concerns that exist today, to a great extent, it's a new technology, so it's not well understood. The vocabulary is not terribly mature, so we often talk past each other when we use it. And right now, if you're in industry, you say AI when you mean money. Not necessarily what you do with the money, not necessarily how you get it. It just means if I go in and try to sell a program, if I say AI, I'll get more money for it. Okay, I mean it's as crazy as that in a lot of circles, and so I think we're kind of as a nation and globally at a point much like what FDR saw in the Depression, which is we've got an awful lot of instability, both in governance and in our personal lives and how we think about things. There was a poll that was taken and a study that was done in the Department of Defense about 2 years ago, and it was interesting what they found, what the key finding was. It was that between the entry-level personnel and the executives, the split in how they see the world was the greatest that they had ever measured, okay? So if you go back to the late 60s, early 70s, that was also the consensus at that time, which was the time of the Vietnam War, that the two parts of the military were on very different sheets of music as far as understanding the world and the context of the world around them and how they thought about that. And we're kind of at that point. And FDR's comment was, the famous quote of, the greatest fear we have is fear itself, okay? And if we get fear paralysis, we will not move forward. We will not find hope. We will not define a world in which we want to participate. We will just say no and watch it go by. And that's not where we want to be. And so that very, very simply is why I wanted to have a conversation about this, is this should not be a default decision that we live with. This should be a participatory activity. We should have a say. We should create a voice. The Lilly Grant gives you the opportunity to start down that path, but just say no is not an option here anymore, okay? And so it is to push on that to some extent. What should it be? What should be the guardrails? What do they look like, et cetera? So to me, the greatest fear I have is that we will not get into the conversation early enough. Because if you wait too long, then the opportunity that you seek is greatly diminished. Okay? I mean, it starts to plant roots, it starts to get roots, and it starts to go in directions you don't want. And then you get organizational, kind of drag that won't allow things to move in a direction that you think you want to be able to do. So that's my biggest worry. On the opposite side of the equation, where do I see great benefit, particularly in the context of the church? And to me, again, it comes back to being the servant. How do I help? How do I start to understand a way? One of the things that I thought was very important for Wesley when I first got here was to start to think about it as a global organization and to start to move to a global audience and to be able to talk to a global audience. And Wesley was doing it before I got here, but they certainly have done a lot. And when COVID came, the part of the church that really flourished here was that part of it, that global reach, that global audience, that global understanding, and that global charisma that had been developed. That really flourished. Now, crisis time, that's why it flourished. It had the opportunity, but it was ready. And what I worry about is making sure we're ready for when AI really starts to take hold, when the STEM generation starts to enter the workforce in large numbers, those types of things. How do we start to think about what we want to be able to do there, number one? And how do we start to bring context to the church when you look globally? It's one thing to say this is the way we see it in Washington. It's another thing to say I don't see it exactly the same way if I'm in South Korea, or if I'm in Africa, or if I'm in the Middle East, Asia. Each of them have a context. The context around the faith is really stable, but the ability to use language effectively, to use interpersonal relations effectively on a global scale for the church needs this tool. Okay, needs a tool that can help you do that at the detail level, at the individual person level. If I'm going to sit down with you and you're from another country and you have different views on a lot of things, I can still talk to you about my faith, number one. But I want to be able to do it in the context that you understand. And I want to be able to help the students get to a place where they can get an assignment, coming out that happens to be in another country, completely different context in which you do it, and step in there and have the tools necessary to be able to do that. And so thinking globally, because that's what's really happening to us via the internet, via any number of communications venues, and our daily life as we think about it. It's a global activity now. No more is it the feudal, my little town, my little neighborhood. All of those things are absolutely critically important, but they have to be in a context that's also scalable up. And so, to me, this is really important. Now, that's the way I grew up in the military. You never knew when you got up in the morning what country you were going to end up in, okay? How do you walk in? How do you say? I mean, if I sit down with my Russian counterpart, the last thing you do in a conversation is smile. Smiling's not allowed. You don't do that. You don't laugh at things. It's just the way they do. If I'm in Japan, it's, okay, first priority when you enter the room is, where are the children? And how are the children doing? The next priority is deference to the elders. And you work your way through this. But each one of those things is done in a context of faith, okay? And it's just important as we do the schooling here that we address those kinds of needs, create the tools for those kinds of challenges, create the tools for the connectivity side of the equation, such that it is not all discovery when you arrive on the first time, okay? You're bringing a message, and a message that you can make useful. You're bringing the ability to understand their language, understand their customs, etc., and their deference and how they think about things and what's important to them and how they prioritize it. Because as a traveler, it's different everywhere. It doesn't make it wrong. It just is different, okay? And to be able to bring the church in and have that kind of capability, particularly on a foundation like Wesley has, where you are a global ministry. You are out there, you're doing it, and the tools necessary to do that, I think, will come from various types of AI type of service and brought in at the education level here to understand, to be able to walk out and coherently think about it, know where to look for it, just like you would in the library. Okay? And so, to me, those are the critical things. I really think this is a great opportunity for the church to put their fingerprints, so to speak, on a capability that right now is extremely disruptive and will be for as long as you can look out into the future. But the longer we wait, the less relevant we become.
So we're asked, what do we fear and what do we hope about AI? And there's a lot of writing on this already. And a lot of the people writing critical things about AI are talking about job loss, job disruption. They're talking about surveillance. And they're talking about bias or, built-in discrimination, et cetera. And I think those are all good comments, good critiques. I think those are valid things to worry about. But what I'm going to talk to you about today is a different thing, a thing I think even now, 2 years into this, 3-4 years into this, we're not talking enough about. And that is the impact of AI on human relationship. And I'm going to start with a story. So in my research, I talked to all kinds of people, but one of the kinds of people I talked to were engineers, AI engineers. And one was this man named Tim Bickmore at Northeastern University. And he was creating a virtual nurse, a discharge nurse, that he put a pilot project together to test it out at Boston City Hospital, which serves largely disadvantaged patients. And they named, the coders named the virtual nurse Louise or Elizabeth. And it was really just a program on a screen. It wasn't a robot, it didn't have a human face. But it would ask the patient if they were a Red Sox fan before telling them about the discharge procedures. And when he surveyed the patients who were in the pilot program after they had experienced Louise or Elizabeth, 74% of them said they preferred the AI discharge nurse to a human clinician. And the reason was, they said, human clinicians, I prefer Louise, one patient said. She gives me time. The human clinicians are always so busy. And inherent or implicit in that statement was a little bit of shame that it was taking them so long to understand the discharge procedures. And here's the human doctor or the nurse kind of tapping their toe saying, I've got 57 other things doing, And studies show that we give patients, disadvantaged patients, or we give patients something like 7 minutes of explanation at discharge, and low education, low skill patients need more like an hour. So we're not serving those people well. I bring this up because that example, there's so much ambivalence there in that example. Because one of the key ways that AI is sold to us is that it will be better than nothing. And nothing is what we are giving these disadvantaged patients in Boston City Hospital. We're giving them 7 minutes when they need an hour. That's nothing, essentially. And so they feel that they're getting served by this AI bot, essentially. So my fear, as exemplified by this story, is about the stratification of human contact. It's about human contact as a luxury. Because we're actually already seeing that, as you can imagine, as you all know, we're already seeing that to some degree. Economists tell us that among the top growing occupations of the last 10 years have been personal services to rich people. Personal trainers, personal investment counselors, personal chefs, just add the word personal in front of it, and that's one of the fastest growing jobs. And so the affluent are pretty much making sure that they're getting their services done by humans, with all the status statements that entails. What I'm afraid of, and what we are already seeing, is that alongside that trend, we're seeing the expansion of bot-provided services that used to be done by a human in this relational work. And I think we will soon, if we do not have it already, we will soon be at a place where someone will be giving those personal services to their affluent client, but themselves receive those services from a bot. And that is what I'm afraid of. That's the fear that I have about AI, that it is kind of amplifying insecurities that are already here, and that we as a country are kind of predisposed to doing this, but we are solving a political problem with technological solutions. Our political inability to fully staff Boston City Hospital with people who can talk to low-skilled or low-education patients. And instead, we're like, well, let's just give them this AI. It's better than nothing. So that very gloomy story is my fear. So where's the hope out of this? Please give us some hope. And there is some hope, I think. But I would call it a long-term hope, kind of oddly. I'm actually quite fearful in the short term. I see the trillions of dollars that the technologists have to make us feel like it's inevitable and to convince us all that you better get on the train or it's leaving without you. So I'm just afraid. The short-term situation looks pretty bad to me. But in a long-term way, I am a true believer that in a world in which AI is all around us transforming work from A to Z, what do humans do well? What do humans do in that world? Well, what humans do well, or what humans do profoundly and sometimes well and sometimes not so well, but they do it with an intensity that really matters, is they connect to other human beings. The human social web, the human social capacity, that's what humans provide. And in my mind, today and for, can I say centuries? I'll say at least scores of years, maybe centuries, we have kind of dismissed that skill, that set of practices of connecting to others. We often call that women's work. We call that soft skills. We call that not even skills at all. We call that innate, or part of someone's essential being that doesn't need training, doesn't need compensation, doesn't need reward, doesn't need recognition. We say, oh, let's count what a nurse does by bedpans rather than by how much a patient feels seen. We're ignoring so much of what's actually really profoundly important. But I kind of feel like, here's the hope, I kind of feel like if that ends up being what we have to offer in a kind of mechanized world, then maybe it will no longer be feminized and ignored when men do it. It will no longer be what women do as women. It will be what humans do as humans. And when its kind of remit expands in that fashion, in that way, then maybe we will actually give it its value, give it its due. And to me, that is hopeful.
One of the reasons we are wanting to have this initiative at Wesley is that what Allison has just described may become the biggest pastoral issue for our graduates over the next few decades, especially if we see the effect on the labor market that some people see we're going to have. And I wonder, Jim, do you think some of the more dire predictions about the disruption in the labor market are accurate? Is this going to be like the Industrial Revolution, only collapsed in a very short period of time?
You guys are Debbie Downers, but it is important. My sense here on the labor side of the equation, is that when you talk about disruptive technologies, when people talk about disruptive technologies, they're generally in two frames. One of them is in the undermining and the basic erasing of what are called norms and regimes. They sit in between policy and law. The norms and regimes, how do you think about a problem, how do you build a case towards a problem, et cetera, and how do you think about that? And when those become disrupted, so think everything that we had through the Cold War was really anchored on a set of norms and regimes, treaties, relationships in the international world, et cetera, that were the way that guided our behavior, guided our interaction. And those were designed to bubble up conversation and personal relationships to thwart the need to have to get to law and war and those types of activities. And so we're in that disruption to me. We're well down that path. There are no more treaties for the nuclear weapons. There are no more treaties for intermediate range weapons, et cetera. It's just the Wild West out there. Whatever you can invent, you can do, okay? Whether it's landmines or you pick it. And so we're in that disruptive period. And part of that disruptive period is, what does the labor market look like as we start to go forward? How do you start to think about it? And I tend to look at companies like John Deere and Tesla, just to follow and kind of understand, because they approached AI in two very different ways, and they market AI to their workforce and to their customers in very different ways. And so in John Deere, I can't get enough people, no matter what you did, no matter how you freed them up, I can't get enough people to drive the tractors necessary to get the crops to feed this country and the rest of the world. I just can't do it. There's no way to do it, okay? Unless I bring people from other countries, et cetera. So they've got a problem, okay? It's very clear. But there are farmers out there that are going broke left and right, losing their farms, losing their livelihoods, et cetera. And where's the disconnect in that? Well, it's the scale. It's the scale of trying to do it. I mean, individual farmer, I grew up on a farm, okay? We were not in horses when I was there, but we had just come out of it. Almost all of the implements had been converted from horse-pulled to tractor-pulled, and when I left, we were leaving gasoline and going to diesel, okay? And when I started, it was 40, maybe 80 acres was the max you could handle. And then we went to gas-powered tractors, and it became 200 or 300 acres. And diesel brought us up to 1,000 acres, real quick. But 1,000 can't get you a living anymore. So I can build the best tractor in the world, and it doesn't matter. It just won't get you there. And so how do you start to think about what that's doing to you? On the other side of the equation is Tesla. And they're looking at, how do I take a look at the auto industry in particular right now? How do I start to think about that? How do I automate it in a way that we move towards scale and manufacturing in this country, affordable manufacturing, affordable products, and safe products, okay? So they're marketing it on affordability and safety, okay? And it's a pretty hard argument to go against. I mean, right now, today, we as humans are very comfortable with killing 100 people a day in car accidents. Doesn't bother us in the least. Doesn't slow anybody down on the highway. It doesn't change your behavior. What will it take? Okay. How do you start to think about that? And how do you start to think about what's good enough and where the role of AI sits? Is it there to do it for us? Is it there to do it in lieu of us? Is it there as a tool that we can use? Both of these companies feel it's a tool. The measure of merit, though, is quite different here. And Tesla's probably closer to my national security side of the equation. If we can numb ourselves to a world in which multiple deaths on any given day, or hundreds of thousands, or wars, or you pick it, is okay, as long as it doesn't affect us, then we're in a bad place, okay? And right now, if you have one car accident, it could shut down the whole industry. But it's okay to kill 100 people a day. And there's disconnects. So when I look for value propositions in AI, I have a hard time coming to an understanding of how to do it, particularly in the national security side of the equation. People will say to me, okay, you're never going to let AI shoot or, commit an act with lethal force, are you? And I say to you, since about the 3rd century we've been doing that, okay? I mean, it's a question of how far away we've put the person or how close we've put the person, okay? But if I say to you, okay, I've got a solution and I can basically move you back, understand your intent, and then act on your intent in a legal and moral way, and I can do that 80% of the time, that's not good enough. So what am I accepting in lieu of that? Okay, number one. the risk construct of AI is often very different, where the CEO of a company or the management level, executive level of national security says, okay, I'm going to buy this thing, Congress, you're going to give me the money, and it's, you know, it's going to be almost perfect. And I'm going to sell it to you as if it's perfect, and we'll fix anything that goes wrong with it. Okay, fine, that's great. If I am the commander of forces forward, engaged, how do I say to somebody, well, we had a solution, but it was only an 80% solution, so we didn't use it. Sorry that you lost your loved one. It's a very different risk calculus. You can't do that, okay? For DARPA, you know, what we were willing to do at the edge, even if it would save one life out of 1,000, we'd give them the opportunity to save, okay? And so many of these equations and judgment scales that we are looking at on judging AI have a perfect risk calculus. When was the last time you met a perfect person? Okay? For us, medicine is fundamentally different in the military today. It's more like a professional sport. Okay? First off, up until the Vietnam War, the conclusion of the Vietnam War, the best we ever did in saving people on the battle space once they were wounded was about 64% of them we could get back. Okay, 64%, and that mostly that came from triage towards after the Civil War. Okay, in Afghanistan and Iraq, with AI as an underpinning, we're hanging somewhere between 95 and 97% survivability rate. It brings back problems that we never had before because people are surviving, but it has done things for us that are fundamentally different, A. B, in the military, you don't own your body, okay? I mean, that belongs to the government. So if I am a professional baseball, football, basketball player, they're the same way. You show up at work and on any given day, how many hours of sleep did you get? I don't trust you. I want to see the documentation off of the watch or whatever you wore. You know, what did you have for breakfast and lunch and dinner? I want to know the exact calorie count and the exact nutrition. I have to know that, and I have to know that right. And whatever sport you're in, if you haven't done it for at least 48 hours, your muscle memory has deteriorated dramatically, and you need to go practice before I'm going to let you go on the field and warm up. I mean, these things are the same for the military now. They have to be, okay? But the problem I've got with that, quite frankly, right now is I still got this body, okay? So if I'm driving my car, I can only see what I'm looking at. Where the AI can see 360 degrees up, down, right, left, all around. And it doesn't blink, and it doesn't get tired, and it doesn't get dehydrated, and it doesn't get distracted. Okay? Number one cause of accidents, distraction. Okay? So there are places here and arguments that favor moving aggressively forward, but there are risk calculus at every level of the activity that have to be explored, and they have to be understood. And the calculus has to be done relative to the context of use, not a one-size-fits-all. That's all I'm saying.
You want to go, or do you want me to?
Yeah, let me ask you a question.
I was going to answer that.
Oh, please.
So what's happening to work is what I'm answering.
Yeah.
This will be fast because you weren't anticipating this question for me. So I have a lot of agreement with the first, a lot of agreement with the first 2 minutes of what he said, and then I know nothing about the use of it in the military, so that was I'm just listening to that. But the first 2 minutes where he's saying this is massive disruption and we are in a world without norms and rituals and kind of the means to predict even, the regimes to contain these disruptions, we don't have those yet. And I agree with all of that. The thing that I would add is I've been giving a lot of talks lately, going around the country, talking to people for a couple of years now. And so I've been witnessing through people's experiences that they tell me. I've been witnessing how work is changing right now. And I would say, and you probably would agree with this, the old regimes are working to use AI to kind of amplify their effects. And by which I mean, for example, my sister is a marketer in California, and her company says, asks her every week, how have you used AI this week? Like, there's a lot of pressure, top-down pressure to use it all the time. And they got rid of 15% of their employees last year, and they anticipate losing another 20% this year. And meanwhile, her volume of work has increased dramatically. So that's like one huge impact. I gave a talk at the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota and spoke to the chief of medicine there, and we were talking about the use of AI scribes, which so many doctors are so happy about because they've been so overburdened by the data documentation requirements of the electronic health record that it has led to burnout, it has led to alienation, they've been not able to look their patients in the eye, and that's not why they got into medicine. It's been anguish, heartrending. Wendy Dean calls it moral injury. And so they're so happy, many of them are very happy about the AI scribe. But, and the AI scribe is, of course, classic second way in which AI is sold to us. It will free us up for more meaningful work. So it's freeing up the doctors from their documentation problem for more meaningful work, for the connective work that they got into medicine for. But the chief of medicine at the Mayo Clinic was very straightforward. It's saving all those doctors all that time, but they're not going to keep that time. He said to me, and this was at the Mayo Clinic, which is actually a great place. I was so impressed when I was there. He said, we'll split that time with the doctors. So they get half of it, and the other half, I'm going to give them more patients. And you can imagine at other places that maybe aren't so great, they're just going to top up the roster even more. And I don't know if you've spoken to a lot of primary care physicians lately, but they are completely run ragged. So they're not going to have this time. They're not going to be freed up. This is a 2-year interregnum until basically the kind of the machine of industrial logic that affects even medicine in the United States takes over. And the third way that work is changing might be more hopeful. Again, I don't know. This is coming out of some MIT economists talking. They have said that because the bots kind of offers a leg up to kind of access to, professional knowledge, it will improve the kind of capacity of what you might call paraprofessionals. So paralegals, all kinds of para-anesthetists, physician assistants, like all the people who are like kind of one level down from the tippity top of their occupation might actually be kind of amplified in their capacities. And that is interesting that, that probably might kind of cut away at some of the elite power among the most credentialed, probably help like a strata of, like, say, lower middle class people. But I don't know whether you have anybody in your 20s in your family, but those people are not finding jobs. And it's debated whether that's because of AI. Some people say that that trend happened before AI. Some people say, oh, companies are doing AI washing, meaning they're claiming the layoffs or the non-hiring is because of AI, and actually it's because of financial instability or economic instability around, et cetera. So we don't really know why, but it is true that people say that these bots are a really good intern. And my 25-year-old would be a really good intern. And it took her about 1.5 years to get a job because, in my view, because companies have other options. So this is kind of a more granular view of what's happening at work, and it's also, I agree, it's basically, these are old regimes of surveillance and disruption and replacement, basically, and maybe we'll have new ones in the future, but the old regimes are hanging on, and they're using AI to affect what they do. Thank you.
Let me keep you at the granular level in just a moment, but there are some who see this change in the labor market coming and say, well, the way we'll deal with that is to provide a guaranteed income in order to offset the loss of jobs. But as I think you indicated, that requires some political will we haven't shown ourselves to have. But let me take you back to the granular level. You, as you talk about what's the last human job, what does that look like? I think of some of the wonderful stories in your book. I think of the teacher in West Virginia, I think it was. I think of the chaplain. I think of others. And of the way you speak about seeing another person and being seen. Would you talk some about that?
Sure, yeah. So I wrote the book after 5 years of observing and interviewing people who do kind of emotional, particular, idiosyncratic, connective, interpersonal work. And so I looked at doctors, primary care physicians, and I looked at teachers, middle school teachers, and I looked at therapists. And then I also had a bunch of other professions that I, kind of took a tour of, hairdressing and police work, actually, and lots of different kinds. But those 3 were my primary. And after 5 years of talking and looking and observing them at work, I stumbled upon something. I mean, this was really in the middle of it, maybe after 1 year. I stumbled upon something they are all doing. They are all doing to do their work well. And that is this thing that I ended up giving a name, and I called it connective labor. And what connective labor is simply seeing the other and having them feel seen. And as soon as I kind of figured out that that's what all of them are doing, I saw it everywhere. I saw it in my kids' coaches. I saw it in my own work, helping, giving PhD advice, I saw it in, the counselors, it's everywhere. What's important about it to remember is that it is interactive. It's not just me downloading that into you, essentially. It is a dance. It's a dialogue. And that's really important when we talk about, can AI do it? And we'll talk more about that later, I'm sure. But that work, that connective labor, that to me is essential to any of these last human jobs. Since the book came out in 2024, I've started to think more about, can AI do it? And, I did think about that beforehand, but I came to realize, or what I would add, essentially, is that it's not just that this work provides dignity and provides motivation, and not even provides, kind of instills or coaxes out this dignity and motivation and purpose and understanding. It does all that, to be sure. But there is also something that we don't really celebrate, but I'm starting to look at more closely, and that is friction. That is the pushback. That is judgment, the shame, conflict, vulnerability, tension, guilt. These aren't all positives, but they are something that humans do with each other. And they're kind of knotty problems. I have a whole part about judgment. I think judgment is super interesting because for the professions that I interviewed, they were both, the people they saw were afraid of their judgment, but also sought them out because they could judge. And so it was like, it's not a clear, it's a thorny kind of thing, judgment. And that is, the power of the human gaze is something that even the engineers that I spoke to recognized. Because at the time, I remember talking to someone at Stanford who was designing an AI teaching assistant, and he was telling me AI is going to be able to do all of this. I'm like, but what about, no. He's like, no, like he was a true believer. But he said, I'm not sure that we'll ever get AI developed enough so that the human will care to kind of, how did he put it, like to prove themselves to it. Like the judgment, the human judgment, and the friction, while partly negative, is also powerful. And yeah, so... Yes. Yeah. I actually have a whole chapter on how people do this work, this connective labor that isn't easily mechanized. It's not a how-to, because there's plenty of those out there, but it's actually what's resistant to mechanization, although some of those true believer engineers would be like, that's just, in 10 years, no problem. But one of them would be, the use of the body, the use of emotions, the spontaneity, the kind of challenge of the unpredictability of the other, and making mistakes. That's something that that therapists could tell me a lot about. You make mistakes, and then you correct yourself. The other person actually feels more seen because you took the time to get it right. And that's part of, when I say it's dialogic, like it's that dance, that's the correction, like, oh, no, that's not quite it. I'm more like this. He's like, oh, that's a very powerful interaction. So, yeah.
In a few moments, I want others to be asking questions, so there'll be a mic, so form the questions in your mind. But I want to say back to what Allison has said, as I read the book and read her describe the last human job and the skills, I thought, well, we know about that. We call that ministry. Those of us here who went to seminary remember reflective listening. You had to pass that to get through here. You had to be able to show that you were listening and to see the other person. And so it's made me think, is this a new opening for what we do? I don't mean just what we do who are seminary graduates and our pastors, but I mean those of us who work to build a beloved community, to help other people do that, and to valorize what other people do, and not diminish it by saying it's innate or women's work, or is there a way we might add value? Because one of the challenges, it seems to me, of what could be a vast change in the labor market is that work gives people meaning. And if we have a lot of people, particularly a lot of younger people, who can't find a job, they're asking existential questions about the meaning of their lives. We ought to be good at existential questions and in providing what it takes to find that meaning, and not just the distinction between work and volunteer, which is where a lot of this now lives, I think. Let me ask you both, you've both already spoken a little bit about the ethical issues involved. could you both respond to that specific question about the ethical concerns that you might have, and how they affect the two very different domains the two of you work in? Because the other task we have is to prepare ethicists, public ethicists.
For Jim first or me? Let's have you. I've been talking.
I think I want to go back just a little bit to the conversation that we just had here. And I have we have two daughters. Both of them are grade school learning disabled teachers. And their number one concern is that between testing and writing evals, the amount of time they have for the student personally is dramatically been reduced. And to cover that time, they end up working at home late into the night in order to be able to get some of that time, which they don't think is enough. Okay, and so if you take that kind of a concern and you go to the church side of the equation, to me what I think probably one of the greatest areas of leverage are going to be is in the lay leadership. Because of all of the places to find this construct articulated, I never would have thought of, but I've discovered it in the National Intelligence Community's Alternate Futures about 2 years back. And they were looking at all of the technologies, and they were looking at all of the social trauma, the climate change, wars, etc. And they said, of all of the institutions in the world, religion is best postured to get to solution and assistance, kind of the para side of ministry, through their people, through their congregations, and giving the congregations the tools to go out and do. Because in times of real crisis, that's generally where you look to is, are there people to come help me because I can't feed myself because of a hurricane? Or you pick the trauma that caused it. But it is in the congregations where a lot of this capability resides, and a lot of that connectiveness is going to be either thrive or not. And I think, giving them the tools is going to be one of the important vectors, David, that you're going to have to think about here, because that capability and the ability to do that at the personal level, because in that trauma, that's really where you're looking for is who's going to hold my hand, touch me on the shoulder, you pick it, okay? And I think that we need to balance that out. I mean, we spend a lot of time on the pastor side of the equation at the church, but the reality here is, and we're seeing it in the student population now, a lot of the people that come through here do not come to be ordained. They come to be able to go back and take the tools and work with people that need the help. Okay, and so I think that's one that's really, really important. And I kind of walked away from your question to do that, but what was I supposed to answer? Ethical.
That was a good answer.
The ethical side of the equation, this is a tough one. This is really a tough one. It's not hard on the military side of the equation as much as it is, I think, in the civilian side of the equation. Look at what you're dealing with. I bring you into the service. I try to erase your identity in the first 6 months so that you just basically walk away from that and you get the identity that I want you to have. And part of that identity is that I'm going to train you to kill, and I'm going to make you really good at it, and I'm going to give you wonderful tools, okay? And then on the day that you separate, I'll say goodbye. I won't take that skill away from you. I can't get it out of you. I don't address that issue. I do that really poorly, ethically, okay? And there's all sorts of documentation that would take you down that path. So how do we start to think about that problem, number one? Because in my community, that's a real problem, a real difficult problem. And people will say, oh God, the horror of war, what you must have seen at the front line. What we found is the front line isn't where it's all going on. You see it at the executive level, you see it at the people who are here in the States flying airplanes that are on the other side of the earth, are having huge trauma issues. Imagine having to do what they have to do during the day and then sit down at the table with kids and wife, or spouse. We got really difficult problems there that we haven't ethically gone after, okay? We've kind of swept them under the table. For years, at least in my profession, it was just don't talk about it and it'll be all better. In other words, I won't bother you with my problem. That's not worked for us at all. And so the ethical side of a lot of this activity is one, different. Two, what technology has allowed to do it for us and what it is promising to be able to do for us is that in some place between the decision to use and authorize lethal force, I can put something that says, here are all the rules. And whatever it is that you're pulling a trigger on won't activate if they aren't met, okay? So kind of the classic case in point would be a shoot house, where I take a person to train them and they have these images jump out in front of them and they've got about a quarter of a second to decide whether to shoot or not shoot, okay? That's the mindset, that's the training. The problem in a quarter of a second is you can't process something that you don't anticipate, number one. You can do reflexive things in about a second, half a second, but cognitive activity takes well over a second, okay? Particularly if you're doing it with your eyes. And so it is just kind of a guess, but I can put a sensor in there that can do this no problem at all. And I can put it on a rifle, I can put it on a pistol, I can put it on an ICBM, okay? We haven't started doing that yet. We're working on that, okay? Did I meet the rules of engagement? Is this, in fact, a legal activity that I'm undertaking at the edge, at the pulling the trigger level? Is there collateral damage here that I'm not aware of, but intelligence tells me is available? Or, is there a school right next door? Is it whatever it is? We're not using those tools yet, but you can see them coming on all of the advanced work that different organizations are doing. These kinds of tools to help us with the ethical side of a moral dilemma, okay? Not the things we like to talk about day in and day out, but they are critical. They are critical to understanding how you're going to do it. And so if you can do it there, can I say to my car, can I say to my washing machine, whatever it is, you can only do the following things, and you can only do them if I say it's okay, and even if I say it's okay and it's wrong, you're not going to do it, okay? That level of detail is now in what is called the SAE, Society for Automotive Engineering, okay? They have these steps, and so in my airplane, if I come in to land and I forget to put the landing gear down, and I keep pressing on, even though I keep blaring at you and yelling at you about it, then I'm just taking over. And we're going to go around until you put the landing gear down, because I'm not going to land without it. Or I'm not going to run into the ground without it. Or I'm not going to drop that bomb without it. Those kinds of skills are now starting to be partnered with the human decision-making, in my business. But you're also seeing it in the commercial sector with automatic braking, things like that are now starting to populate cars. And we just did a major upgrade of the Highway Safety Transportation Group in testing. So now you get tested for these automated things that will take over in lieu of your performance. And we'll stop the car. We'll pull the car off to the side of the highway and say, until you start performing better, we're not going any further, okay? And those are out there in the market in some fashion right now, but they're the sophistication of them is starting to come in big waves. And so as we look at that, okay, that's not necessarily the kind of ethical discussion you were looking for, but that's really, you know, at least in my business, those are the kinds of things that become extremely important to us, okay? And the other thing that we've tested an awful lot, DARPA was the home of Siri before Siri was Siri, okay? And how do you create a relationship with a machine? And people will scoff at that very quickly, but it's kind of like with your pet, okay? What we have found is that you can in fact create a relationship. And the earlier example given of first, how are you doing today? And then I'll talk to you about discharging you from the hospital. There are things that we can do to make these things a little more personable. We intentionally put a very shrill Karen in airplane warning systems that yells at the pilot when they are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, including not having their eyes in the proper scan. Well, I'm stopping, I'm having a drink of coffee. No, you're supposed to be watching the instrument panel. Don't drift off on this stuff. So this kind of symbiotic relationship is starting to be developed. Will it ever be human-to-human connected? I can't see that. I can't find a way to get to that point, and there's just a lot of reasons for it. But
okay, so the question is, what are your ethical concerns? I'm going to say something about the military, about which I know almost nothing, and then I'm going to say two ethical concerns that I have in my own wheelhouse. The first is, I'd love to hear, when you said we've had this since the 3rd century, part of that is kind of what I would say is like the mediation of killing, like of lethal force, like, you know, kind of more and more distance between the person using the lethal force and the person who dies. And that's also allowed for a greater and greater distance between the civilian and the military. And that to me seems like part of the problem that you're describing, that the military kind of carry this burden, and increasingly more and more by themselves, really, because it's so distant, and I kind of feel like AI makes that distance even greater. So I kind of wonder whether some of these ethical problems that you're discussing sound like they're going to get worse, actually, because the distance will be even greater. And anyway, so I'm just throwing that out there.
I think you are right.
Yeah. Here.
You know, in Vietnam, the B-52s lived in Guam, and they would come and drop their bombs and go back to a dinner at the old club, and you know, they weren't part of the war as far as those of us that were in country felt. They just kind of, you know, and they shouldn't get medals. I mean, they shouldn't go to school. There was this whole movement that just kind of discounted, because of geographic distance, that problem. But today, for the STRATCOM commander, I have kind of two regimes. I have speed of light, and then I have Mach 30 and above, okay? There's no place on Earth that I can't touch in a few milliseconds, and there's no place on Earth that I can't get to with a physical structure in less than 10 or 15 minutes. You know, so that change is going completely counter to the ethos and the norms and regimes of the Department of Defense. We don't know how to handle it.
Yes, that's essentially what I would say. Okay, so my ethical concerns are twofold, really. One is kind of actually about something we haven't talked about that much, which is about the idea of work as a luxury, the disappearance of work. When I talk to all those engineers who were, you know, automating so many, like that was their task. And I would say to them, what's going to happen? And they did bring, what's going to be the societal impact of what you're doing? And they would say the answer was universal basic income. Like they would say, yes, I'm automating people out of a job, but don't worry, we'll solve that because some people will work and some people won't have to. And that led me down the path of like, what is work and what do we get out of it and why is it important besides just financial? And there have been many writers who write about that, but most of them talk about kind of regularity, routine. But I want to also talk about the fact that at work we are with people who are not our friends and not our family. And that actually, I think, is valuable for society. If we only choose who we are with, then it's really, we become even more siloed than we are today. And we lose this is my fear talking, okay? We lose our sense of the other person as someone we are responsible for, someone who is part of on the inside rather than on the outside. And when we have such a kind of stunted view of what we're responsible for, that sounds like it's really taking aim right at the social fabric. Do we have a social fabric without that sense of the other on the inside? So that's fear number one, or ethical concern, I think, number one. Ethical concern number two is that in their kind of triumph, in their victory dance, the AI engineers are prioritizing disruption. And I get that. There is some value in breaking through the old systems. I understand that. Some of them were hidebound and restrictive, and where was freedom and that kind of thing. But by moving fast and breaking things, they are breaking a lot of the existing social infrastructure that actually, I would say the disadvantaged need even more than the advantaged. I'm taking aim with this comment on the notion of, on what sounds like a kind of radical egalitarianism of AI. Like anyone can learn, anyone can build, anyone can start a company. There's this kind of sense of possibility, which is so romantic. It's a kind of core romantic part about Silicon Valley and the American dream of the last 25 years. But it sounds egalitarian, but the things they're getting rid of are these kind of social connections and relational ties like mentoring or, these, the discharge nurse instead of Louise. That's going to be very powerful. It's important. Relationships are extra important, and this is not just my research talking, but others are even more important for marginalized populations. Like they rely on them even more to decode the hidden curriculum, to make visible what middle-class people just understand because they've been taught, et cetera. So I'm the ethical point I'm making here is to basically dislodge or I'll say question the purported radical egalitarian promise of AI. And I think that poses an ethical concern as we venture into the new century. Thank you.
Well, let me open up to those of you here. There's a traveling microphone. Evan has that, I think, or he's about to. Who has a question or a comment to the panel?
Well, thank you, General Cartwright and Professor Pugh for coming tonight and sharing your thoughts with us. My name is Matthias, graduated 2022, studied public theology here, so very interested in this topic. I could probably ask you 50 questions, but I'll try to think of the best one. The movie Terminator, the Skynet is the thing that has ruined the world, and they go back in time to try to kill the engineer that designed the original program. And it's been a trend in civil justice law enforcement to acquire old military technology, which has led to an increased militarization of local police forces. And so I am curious what, if any, steps are being taken to prevent what I see happening in Ukraine, which is just the skies filled with lethal drones at all times, which kind of renders, I mean, that's another question, is the strategic future of AI-driven warfare creating kind of a static front line. But how do we prevent the application of that technology internally or domestically?
The case that's probably most outstanding is the New York Police Department, which was headed by a retired Marine, but bringing in that kind of capability into police justice type of an environment, and it really, independent of how good it may have been tactically, even in a city, the appearance of a military internal activity just because it was an armored vehicle or something like that was too disruptive to get the good that they hoped they would get out of it. And so I think it was about 2006-07 that we pulled all of that stuff out of police departments. Now, they still have command vehicles that are protected so they can get in close enough to understand the situation. They still use bomb disposal stuff that came from the military. But police enforcement has really moved more towards the person-to-person, not weaponized, let's talk this through, let's get it de-escalated, even if it takes days. So that side of the equation has somewhat been addressed. The more difficult side of the equation really today is in the AI side of the equation. Companies that are building algorithms initially for defense activities now are finding that these data-rich mining that goes through these algorithms can be used in law enforcement and in the Department of Homeland Security side of the equation for immigrants and whatnot. And so that's becoming a real problem that we've really got to sit down and start to think about, because the sources of their knowledge right now would be okay if you went to the law. I mean, we're looking, normally you would say, okay, you can't have my social security number, you can't have my medical record, whatever it is. But by association, to give you an example, if you call up a movie on your television set into the box, within a few minutes I can tell you your social security number. It doesn't take me any time at all to figure that stuff out. And it's not by finding it in your house, it's by just what do you do on a regular basis. And so there are these ancillary type activities that are being discovered with AI by association in the algorithms that are causing us real concern about privacy issues, et cetera. And we're going to have to figure out how we handle that. It has been a wonderful boon for the medical community to have more consistent data over a longer period of time to do diagnosis. But in law enforcement, the way it's being used right now is somewhat ethically questionable. And so you can see this. I mean, Europe is struggling with this. The whole international community is what's acceptable and what's not. The problem of just saying no may shut off some valuable service, and so it has second and third order tentacles that you got to be careful of.
The church proclaims that every person bears the image of God, and yet our culture has conflicted and an expanding sense of personhood. Corporations can be legal people. Animals may have complex lives. And yet, an AI might be able to simulate or imitate consciousness or sentient, and yet humans still dehumanize one another. What theological resources can the church offer for discerning dignity and obligation in this changing landscape? Is it even possible to imagine that we may have to one day, sooner rather than later, grapple with personhood, non-biological? And is the church preparing to deal with those questions?
Oh, the second part, I'd say no, it's not. And that I'm hoping that one of the things we can do is stimulate that kind of discussion. But I'll try a preliminary answer. One of the firms that is really, I think, admirable right now is Anthropic, as they're trying to think about how can we address the ethics of AI through its tool, which is called Claude. I don't know how they came up with Claude, but it's Claude. And Anthropic has said that it wants Claude to be a genuinely good, wise, and virtuous agent. And they're doing a lot of work to try to figure that out. David DeSteno at Northeastern is a professor and a psychologist, and says that effort is going to likely fail, not because there isn't moral wisdom in scripture, sermons, and theological treatises, texts that Claude has undoubtedly already scraped from the web and integrated. Not because of that, but because Claude is missing a crucial mechanism by which religion fosters moral growth. And that mechanism is a body. So you think back on what Allison had to say about the person-to-person contact, even the bodily presence, even the mistakes, maybe especially some of the mistakes, but it's the body that matters. And I would say from my background in the Christian tradition that the body is critical to our own theological understanding. It's critical in Christian understanding. One speaks of the body of Christ, the Corpus Christi, which, by the way, is where the idea of the corporation came from. It's a Christian idea of the body of Christ. And our understanding that Jesus became flesh and dwelt among us is just a profound statement about the importance of the physical presence. And up here we celebrate the Eucharist and share in the body of Christ. So I think there's something there for us to build on theologically to get at part of your question. There is a wonderful conversation on YouTube between Allison and Louis Kim, who I mentioned earlier. He has been part of a discussion among Roman Catholic theologians and healthcare providers, where they focused on a concept that you were probably a part of the development of this phrase, the irreducible encounter principle. That this thing we're circling around, which we think is at the heart of ministry, which we can back up theologically, is that there's an irreducible encounter that happens between living, sentient humans. And that's the encounter between finite creatures and, for us, the encounter with the risen Christ. So I just offer that as the beginning of a conversation like that. Others?
I have another ethical question to consider, and it is about an interaction with an AI where the person who's receiving the discharge or the nursing or psychologist or those services will start to create for themselves the other person, right? Because they'll create that empathy, they'll fill that empty space with something between them that actually is not really between them. It's like inauthentic. And my concern is that AI identify itself. We should have some kind of rule that this person, I am AI, like you don't invent for yourself, so that you actually know as a person that you're not talking to something and creating something unreal, you know, in front of you, because it's not really there. And I can't say if AI is eventually going to become sentient. But where we are now, I think there's a risk in that. Anyway, I just wanted to know what you all think about, or what we're doing.
Thank you. A couple things to say about that. The first is completely agree. I've been developing a list of kind of 10 policy or programmatic or just responses that a kind of relationship-centered person can get behind. And one of them is AI transparency. But I want to direct you to a report done by Data and Society, which is a nonprofit think tank in Manhattan. And one of the things that they found is that people know that they are talking to an AI. And I'm talking specifically about the use of AI companions or, you know, kind of chatbots for extended conversation. And they know. It's not that they don't know. And this brings up another issue that is an ethical one that we all have to face, which is kind of the human vulnerability to what the AI, what the technologists are selling. And really, I would say the technologists' adjustment to that, you know, because what they've kind of created are validation machines. And it turns out that really feeds something for many. And hence we have things like AI psychosis and other forms of made-up kind of ills. But the machines, the AI that is being created are targeting that. I saw a study where ChatGPT, the ratio of yes to no replies was 10 to 1. So, yeah, what's been called sycophancy, you know, the sycophancy problem. So that, now, you talk to an engineer and like, that's solvable, you know, you can just build that in and, you know, and you can also even solve it today with your prompts. You can say, I want a more oppositional, you know, be my debate opponent, you know, whatever. You can ask it to do that. But what the limitations of that are essentially generated by capitalism, because what the technologists want is they want you locked on for hours. And it turns out that human beings would prefer to be validated and wrong than pushed back upon into the right answer or whatever. So yeah, I think you're describing a real problem. AI transparency would be my first answer, but unfortunately it's not the only one because of our kind of built-in vulnerabilities and how they are aiming right at them. I think you have something to say.
I think the problem's worse than what you're even stating. I mean, today in kind of the entertainment side of the equation, people are selling their voices, selling their looks, selling, you know, prior fame to companies to be chatbots, to be movie actors that are virtual. And today, yes, I can tell the difference in a movie whether it's a real person or not. That's going to go away pretty soon, you know. And so we have to figure out here how to do this. And as much as I would like to say that Anthropic, is doing the right thing. Really at the core of that argument is, do I have the right to go in and see the data that you're using to make the decision? And the answer is no, because that's my proprietary, patented advantage in the marketplace. And no, you can't do that. Do I have the right to repair my combine? No, because that is a proprietary software and you can't get there. And so we've got a challenge here between intellectual property and the opportunity to use that, and then what it's used for once permission is given. And there are a lot of lawsuits going on right now about how you used my voice, or I said you could use it for a certain period of time and now it's there forever. Those kinds of questions are all out there. So this is a really, really difficult issue.
You're welcome for creating really difficult issues for you to grapple with. The syncophacy problem, I've just heard, came across that phrase over the last couple of months. We understand that as original sin, I think. And I've come to think that when we say AI, the real danger isn't artificial intelligence. It's the combination of that technology with social media and CGI that in the entertainment side, but in others too, where AI really is artificial intimacy. That's really what we're up against in a lot of ways, and how we can combat artificial intimacy takes a degree of moral formation that we're just not used to, except in very intense settings like this one. Any other questions? Oh, up front here, yeah, and then back.
General Cartwright, sir, you talked about using these capabilities to monitor human performers. You talked about pilots and making them do the right things, which is all about improving the performance of the whole system, right? But I think there's a bigger issue here, in that the threat that may be coming may be that it won't matter how efficient these systems are. But when we talk about asymmetrical warfare, we talk about millions of drone fleets, and we talk about network attacks on infrastructure, civilian infrastructure. It may be that one of the theories that the bombs and the missiles and the submarines and the big bore guns won't matter because they'll be obsolete. What is the potential that this is true, and what is the potential that the fact that we're the dominant military power now, and it may not matter if small actors who have little money can undermine the whole enterprise.
My sense is that as we move towards the ability to do swarm-type logic, the target for that is in cognitive theory is chaos theory. Okay, so the two are being put together right now, and so when you look at that, what you do with leverage is, in the case that you use as an example, is that I can be a very small country, but I can build weapons at scale and numbers for money that's within my reasonable reach in comparison to any time in previous history. Okay, so I can be a small country and I can field a 10,000 plane Air Force that you don't have enough bullets for. Okay. And so the counter, this goes back and forth, typical Cold War type stuff. You go back and forth, I can counter that, then I build a worse. But the leverage that is being found in the high compute capability, both in the industrial side of the equation and in the operational side of the equation, is pretty dramatic. And my takeaway, on the Iran conflict right now is, okay, got it, nukes and whatever. But the real issue here that worries me and that is the takeaway here is that the concept of mass and the concept of strategic depth have basically been erased. We spent our whole existence here in the United States with the protection of 2 oceans. Doesn't matter anymore, okay? You know, and whether it's mountains and elephants or, you know, you just go back in history, as you erase those boundaries that protect you, then the opportunity for much smaller countries, much less wealthy countries, at least in the way you measured wealth in the past, have an incredible opportunity to level a playing field. And so, you know, it'll be interesting because if you look at the Iran issue and then you overlay it on the Taiwan issue, what I take away from that is if you want to protect your country, you can hold out for almost forever. Okay? And you can impose unacceptable costs on any sophisticated adversary. That's not terrorism, that's just the new warfare standard that appears to me to be emerging. And so how do you think about that? What's different? In warfare, nothing ever goes away. You just add on, you know, and so that means it's going to be expensive. But if I'm a small country, nuclear weapons are a choice, not something you can deny me of ever. Okay, and drones and things like that are a choice. And if that's the way they go, pretty hard to imagine what the future is going to look like.
Let's do one other question back here.
I'm sitting here trying to articulate how I want to pose my question. The human race has advanced many eras repeatedly. And when I think about the church, I think about the Pentecostal church of this day, the charismatic church. In my days growing up as a boy, I mean, healing was a big thing. And the preachers who could heal, if you have an eye problem, they can cause you to see. If you have an ear problem, they can cause you to hear. That becomes irrelevant now. Those preachers are, because I can go buy me a glasses, I can get a hearing aid, I can do many things. If I was blind, I could still read. I can get the braille. So my question is, in regards to AI, what is the issue? Right? What are we afraid of? What are we most concerned with? And secondly, where are my grandchildren going to be? My great-grandchildren. What are they going to be sitting on the stage there discussing, or sitting in the audience listening to and trying to figure out? Because at some point, AI is going to be a thing of the past. Because when we had the cell phones, I mean, nobody can imagine how you could just speak to someone anywhere in the world, and then the cell phone went to another level where you could see people. And people went to the moon, and you could talk to the people on Earth from space. And so that level of advancement, and as a preacher, I'm trying to figure out what is the real core issue with AI. What are we thinking about in the future? What is AI going to do to our planet? What is it going to do? How is it going to make our children become? And so I'm trying to figure that stuff out. And my question is, what is the real issue? If there was a real issue, a real concern, that we are afraid of AI because we are concerned of what AI can become or do because we have done a whole lot of stuff in our world. A whole lot of stuff. And at some point, the microwave used to get you sick, the cell phone would give you cancer, so all of those things came about, and now that's like the norm, right? You've got to have a microwave, otherwise you're in the dark ages. And if you didn't have a cell phone, you are in the dark ages. And so I don't know if I'm making any sense in regards to what is really the issue with AI that we would say, oh, the AI is different than the invention of the cell phone. It's different than the microwave because X, Y, and Z.
I'm going to try to answer that, or not answer it, but respond as a way to sort of close this discussion and then invite you all to come back to refreshments in the back. I think in some ways it's always been the question, what is it to be human? That AI is really focusing that question in ways that maybe all the other technological advances haven't. I would guess there were people sitting around a monastery really worrying about this Gutenberg guy who came up with a printer, that was just going to destroy Christian theology. It's going to put preachers out of work. It's going to take down all the monasteries. It's just going to wreck us. It didn't, by the way. In fact, it was a flowering of the faith after the invention of the Gutenberg Bible and the Gutenberg printing press. So I think I ultimately am hopeful. I didn't start being hopeful, but because of what some of the things General Cartwright has said, he's more optimistic than he appeared today when he talks about the future. Right, Jim? Yeah. He's good at identifying all the possible problems, but he's really more optimistic. And then also, Allison's research helped me realize, let's get back in touch with what it is to be human. I tried my own attempt at kind of putting this out on paper, really just for myself, about the impact of AI. And it ran to 4 or 5 pages that somebody like a seminary president would write in the language we all kind of understand. And then I gave it to Jim. And in about 10 minutes, he came back with a version that he'd put through some programs. But I found out that the key that he told the program to work with was a phrase I had come to as I was writing this, and that is Christian humanism. That for me, the angle was Christian humanism as a way to think about how do we think theologically, how do we think practically about what we do in response to the challenge for AI. And it means, the question is, who are we as humans before God? What is our purpose here? The question isn't to be or not to be, because we're all going to die. The question is, what do we do with the life we have here? So that's my try at that. I want to thank Jim and Allison for their time, their vulnerability, and their thoughtfulness here today. Would you join me in thanking them? And remember to get The Last Human Job by Allison Pugh. Any of us in the church will look at that and say, there are 10 ideas here that I can use. And she doesn't know that when she wrote it, but it is the case. And we have refreshments for you in the back, and we thank you for coming.